The Griot Museum of Black History opened in 1997 here in St. Louis to become a resource for Black culture in our region. And here today is the founder and executive director of the Griot Museum, Lois D. Conley. Welcome, Lois.
Hi, thank you.
So glad you're here. So 20 plus years now, you're going into your 21st year.
Absolutely.
How exciting.
Very exciting, yes.
So back in 1997, you had this idea, maybe started even prior to that, to open a Museum of Black History here in St. Louis.
Yeah, actually probably 6 or 7 years prior to this, I guess, inspiration came about, and took some time to even accept the challenge. But yeah, finally by 1997 we were able to get open.
Yeah, okay, so the idea of opening a museum, and that is daunting.
It is.
And it wasn't, do you have a history in your career background of working in museums or working in archival records or anything like that?
No, my background was in education. My undergraduate degree is in communications and my master's is in education. I hadn't ever really worked in a museum, but always had a really strong interest in history, and particularly in Black history. Growing up and just in personal experiences. I didn't have any thoughts of ever working in or running a museum, for sure.
Well, and then when you started this, when you came up with this idea in the 90s, did you look around the St. Louis area to see if there was something like that and found that there was a lack of opportunity to study Black history here?
And I think that really was the impetus that kept me kind of going in the direction of founding the museum. It's just a realization that, in fact, there was nothing really from an institutional standpoint that was acknowledging the importance of our Black history. And St. Louis has such a rich and strong heritage relative to Black experience, and it just seemed a shame that nobody was doing anything about it.
So does the Griot Museum primarily focus on our region and the history of the Black culture and Black people here in St. Louis specifically, or?
Right, yeah, that is specifically what we do. We focus on the regional history, African American experience as it relates to the national story, because St. Louis is such a rich place of history as it relates to the African American experience. We have landmark cases in terms of civil rights. We have important activities that have occurred here in St. Louis that have not only impacted St. Louis, but have impacted our nation. Yeah. But it's really exciting for me to be able to make that local, regional connection to the bigger story.
And look what's gone on in these 20 years.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the exciting part, is you get to really be a part of it. And I like that, because I always like to think that history is not dead. It's very dynamic, very moving, always inclusive.
So how have you kept the museum current with the history that's in the making right now in St. Louis and has been for the past several years?
Well, we try to stay on top of current events. We try to look for funding opportunities so that we can be able to bring those stories to the museum and present them to the public, and to be able to capture some of the archival material that's important for not only current events and current activities, but for people who will come after us, who will be able to learn about these stories as well. So we're always looking for those and trying to be in the mix so that we become part of that important story.
Yeah. And are you still in this original location?
We are. We bought this building in 1992 or so. Have owned it since that time and have been in that same location.
So you really were planning ahead.
We were planning ahead. Not knowing what the exact development processes were going to be, we just had a feeling that something was going to happen in that neighborhood, and we wanted specifically to be in a community, in a neighborhood, not in a commercial area necessarily, but in a place where the people to whom this might have some relevance would be living. And so that's why we were excited about being in that space. And now, some 20 years later, suddenly, it looks like the neighborhood is going to be revitalized.
Yeah, that's awesome. And school groups, I imagine, do they come in and see the museum?
Well, school groups historically have been our largest audience. That has somewhat dwindled over the past years, and so we're hoping that that's going to start to pick up again. But that's where the stories belong, in the heads of those young students who have no frame of reference for our history.
Absolutely. All right, very good. We're going to take a quick break, Lois, and come back and learn more about your current exhibits at the museum. So stay with us at STL Live. We'll have more with the Griot Museum of Black History after this break.